Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought, of course, that I would give my little fight review and my fight analyzations on UFC 309, which was, of course, a great card. I think that it pretty much lived up to the hype. I think that's, pretty much all the fights on here were excellent fights. This was one of the best cards that I've really seen in a very long time. And the UFC is known for putting on a lot of great cards and a lot of great fights. I ended up getting all five predictions correct. I pretty much just went with the favorites in this fight, although there was a couple of fights that would be quote unquote close calls, especially the last, 4 to 3 fights within this fight. Of course, I believe Lerone, versus that of Dan Ige, that was going to be a very tough fight, to where I was not exactly quite sure, but from what I had seen of Lerone in the past, I was going to go with him as the favorite. And Dan Ige has always been a very decent fighter, but he does end up losing usually when it comes to the top contenders that could potentially be the top five of that weight class or the top three specifically. So it is what it is. Of course, you had Magomed Ankalaev, I believe the Russian at 205 at the light heavyweight class. I predicted him over Rakic. And of course, when you talk about Khamzat Chimaev versus Robert Whitaker, I believe that I picked Khamzat Chimaev, nowhere near to be as dominant as what he was. But, I did pick him to win, I believe, by that of a decision or, maybe a fourth or fifth round stoppage. But he definitely surprised me. But of course, what's ended up surprising even more people was the fact that Mr. Ilia Topuria, who I ended up favoring within this fight within the main event between the former 145-pounder featherweight champion with that of Max Holloway, and of course now the new current king of that weight class with Mr. Ilia Topuria. I favored Ilia Topuria to win. Now, I did not favor him to win by knockout. I was slightly stunned by that, but I can't say that I was necessarily shell-shocked. Max Holloway, he's 32 years old, but at the end of the day, Max Holloway has been in a lot of wars. He's been in three different fights with Alexander Volkanovski. He did recently just get in a fight with Justin Gaethje. Now, he didn't really take that much damage in that fight because I don't think Justin Gaethje really fought the best of game plans in my personal view. I think he made that fight a bit too easy for Max. And of course, that's not even bringing up the Dustin Poirier, fight that he had to deal with. And of course, Max Holloway, when it comes down to it, he just got in the ring with the fighter, with Ilia Topuria, that is just more skilled and better than him. It is what it is. And, a lot of people, of course, when they take a look at Max Holloway, a lot of people, including Max Holloway, now, of course, Max, he kind of says that to hype himself up a little bit, but there's a lot of people that believe that Max Holloway is the best boxer and all that of the UFC, and no, he's not. When you talk about boxing ability, Ilia Topuria is about a level or two above that of Max Holloway, and I'm going to explain why. But the reason why I wanted to talk about this video is not only because Ilia Topuria, in my view, it's very clear that he's going to be a major mess to deal with for anyone that's really going to go after him, especially at the 145-pound weight class, to not only talk about the reign of that of Mr. Ilia Topuria, but also to talk about the UFC politics, especially when it comes to that of Max Holloway. Because whenever there is a Max Holloway fight, whenever there's commentary on Max Holloway, and all respect to Max Holloway, Holloway is one of the greater fighters within that of UFC's history. But he's probably one of the more overrated all-time great fighters within that of UFC's history. Not just in terms of his skill set, which has been proven to be overrated against elite superior fighters, whether it be Volkanovski or Dustin Poirier, or whether it be against that of Ilia Topuria. He pretty much got beat by every single one of those guys when it came down to it, but on top of that, Max Holloway, like people, the way that they keep trying to talk about, like you would think that Max Holloway has like 5 to 7 title defenses. He has 3 title defenses, I believe, throughout his career at the 145-pound weight class, which of course is a great accomplishment. But for whatever reason, Max Holloway always usually gets ranked in an area that, in my personal view, he really doesn't belong in. And pretty much like the regular commentary crew, whenever it comes to that of a Max Holloway fight, they made it seem like he was winning a fight or very close to winning a fight that he really had no business being up in the first place. The first round, I thought, very clearly went to Mr. Ilia Topuria. Not only did Ilia Topuria end up taking him down a couple of times, in my view, it was very clear he landed the more effective and the more powerful strikes, both to the legs and also to that of the face, at least with the way that I had seen it. And I believe that there was possibly even a flash knockdown at the end of that first round. Now, the second round was very, very competitive. It was very, very close. And the first round was competitive as well. This was a very competitive fight. But the way that Max Holloway fans, and a big part of Max Holloway fans' delusion is partially because, once again, the way that Dana White and a certain amount of these guys promote him, which, of course, once again, great, great fighter. As great as what many people try to allege that he is, no. It is what it is, but it's whatever. That's why he got pieced up by Volkanovski. That's why he got pieced up by Dustin Poirier. And that's also why he got pieced up by that of Mr. Ilia Topuria. Because those guys, all around skill-wise, they're better fighters than what Max Holloway is. It is what it is. But anyways, we're going to get into it. We're also going to see what Mr. Dustin Poirier, a fighter that has fought Max in the past and beat him, in my personal view, quite dominantly in that rematch. We're going to see what he has to say as well. But let's get into it. Let's see what they have to say.
The undefeated champion stayed and still. Khamzat Chimaev kept that 0 and perhaps a new title challenger in the light heavyweight division. We'll talk about it all. First, we're going to start with an amazing champion, Ilia Topuria.
This fight card was big for a multitude of reasons. For those of you, of course, that did not know pretty much what was going on with this UFC fight card, of course, it pretty much was a showcase, of course, you can state that every fight is a showcase fight somewhat to a degree because you're always trying to show off your skills. But basically, 3 of these fights, they were basically kind of title fights or like almost interim title fights. Of course, the Topuria versus Max Holloway fight, that was for the official title. But when you talk about Robert Whittaker versus Khamzat Chimaev, that was a fight to where whoever ended up winning that fight more than likely was going to get the shot at the South African middleweight champion, Dricus du Plessis, I believe, who, of course, recently ended up stopping that of Israel Adesanya. And, of course, when you talk about that of Magomed Ankalaev, I believe I'm pronouncing his name correctly. There's so many Dagestanis that sometimes it's a bit hard for me to remember, and they have very similar names. But I believe that I'm pronouncing the brother's name. I believe that I'm pronouncing his name right. Magomed Ankalaev, however you pronounce his name, but the very dangerous Russian contender at 205 pounds, who of course had a very interesting fight over Mr. Rakic. And that fight was competitive, but Rakic has always shown that, in my personal view, that he's just not willing to stand his ground quite enough overall in order to usually win some of the bigger fights. I've seen that against Jiří Procházka, and even though he was willing to stand his ground against Jiří Procházka, the problem is that he just wasn't quite tight enough defensively as what he needed to be. And Jiří Procházka, he's a guy to where he's a very flawed fighter, especially in terms of his striking style, because his hands are down very, very low. He has a very herky-jerky style of movement to where he can be timed. And on top of that, his strikes are very much advertised. That's why Alex Pieta, especially in the rematch, was pretty much able to dominate him. But when it comes down to it overall, Rakic, I thought that, he still did good. But Magomed, let me tell you what, or Magomed Ankalaev, that dude is going to be a problem, in my personal view. And even Alex Pieta personally knows it. And I'm not going to state that Alex Pieta is quote-unquote ducking that of Magomed Ankalaev, but Alex Pieta knows that that dude is a threat. And when I take a look at him talk about Magomed Ankalaev, he treats him overall with a different type of energy than I've seen him treat any of those other fighters. Different than Jiří, different than Jan Blachowicz, different overall than that of Jamal Hall-Hill or Khalil Roundtree Jr. He treats Ankalaev different than any of those other guys. And the way that I take a look at Alex Pieta recently stating he's a bit nervous about that matchup against Ankalaev.
Amazing piece of championship artwork here. Dustin, you've been in there with Max twice. You got to be impressed, though, with the still undefeated Ilia Topuria.
I am more than impressed. I'm blown.
Ilia Topuria is debatably the best boxer within that of the whole entire UFC's roster. And the difference is between Max Holloway and that of Ilia Topuria. Max Holloway is a decent hand striker. He's a great hand striker for an MMA fighter. But in terms of boxing, no. And Max Holloway has one fatal flaw that has always usually gotten him beat, especially against elite level boxers for an MMA fighter, whether it be against Conor McGregor, Alexander Volkanovski, Dustin Poirier, or Ilia Topuria. And the main thing about Max Holloway is that he does not really change levels in terms of his head movement. His head movement is very, very straight a lot of the times, or oftentimes he does not change levels enough. One thing that you notice about Ilia Topuria, if you know anything about boxing, and you can tell that Ilia Topuria has very, very, very high boxing background. Every time Ilia Topuria throws a punch, every single time that he especially is throwing that jab, he's changing levels, when it comes down to it. And on top of that, he is moving his head off the center line. Max does not move his head off the center line very well. And that's why when you talk about actual good boxers for an MMA fighter, whether it be Conor McGregor, Dustin Poirier, Alexander Volkanovski, or that once again of Ilia Topuria, he gets beat by every single one of those guys.
Wait, man. Not that I didn't think it could happen. Of course it could happen. Topuria is an incredible boxer, big power, sits down on all his punches, great technique. I just didn't think it would happen. Just look at...
I didn't quite think that he was going to knock out Max because I didn't quite know how powerful Ilia Topuria was, but it's very obvious that this dude right here, that this guy, this dude's got A++ level power. I mean, it's just ridiculous. I mean, when he knocked out Alexander Volkanovski, I thought, well, maybe Volkanovski, maybe he's not quite the same after those two Islam Makhachev fights. Maybe he's especially not the same, overall after, after Makhachev knocked him out, within that rematch. So I was like, I don't really know, how seriously to take his power. I mean, obviously, Ilia has always been a very powerful puncher. But in terms of, really having that same level of power, I was wondering really how severe it was. But then when I seen him knock out Max Holloway today, apparently Max said that he had one of the best weight cuts, if not the best weight cuts of his career, and one of the best training camps and one of the best diets. And on top of that, when you talk about it, Max Holloway recently just came off of one of the more dominant and greater performances in his career against, of course, Justin the Highlight Real Gagey, one of the monsters at 155 pounds. And Max Holloway pretty much dominated and beat Justin Gagey from pillar to post. And, of course, was able to knock him out within that of the final 5th round. But Ilia Topuria is on a whole nother level compared to that of a Justin Gagey.
You saw him standing in the octagon with that rose in his hand. Now it's time to give him his flowers because he is everything he said he was. He said what he's going to do, and he went out there, and he did it. He knocked out, first man in the world to knock out a legend in Max Holloway, one of the best 45-pound fighters.
Agreed. And, one thing I'll give about Max Holloway, once again, I always found his skill set to be a little bit overrated. But the thing is that what I will say about Max is that he is an elite level fighter. He does have an elite level skill set. And what I will say about Max is this. When you talk about a championship level fighter that has one of the greatest chins in history, he might debatably have the greatest chin in history when you talk about, once again, just a championship level fighter or a fighter that was a champion at one point in time and that could take a great hit. He's up there with Chuck Liddell. He's up there with, some of the other fighters that perhaps I'm not mentioning. I'm not really sure what else or who else I would necessarily put up there. But Max Holloway is up there with one of the greatest chins in boxing. And once again, I'm not quite sure how much damage he took after the Justin Gagey fight. But, once again, with Volkanovski, I was like, okay, well, maybe Volkanovski was a little bit battle damaged. But with Max Holloway, he really didn't take that much damage with Justin Gagey, at least from what it seemed. So Ilia Topuria just seemed overall really to just have that amount of crack or that amount of power, which is really just crazy.
That's ever walked the earth.
I mean, it's a manifestation. We talked about it yesterday.
And I could tell even within the first round, Ilia Topuria, I believe, hit Max with something. Perhaps it was a left hook or something, and it wobbled Max a little bit. And the only other time I've ever seen Max Holloway really that wobbled in the ring before was against this man right here, Mr. Dustin Poirier, who also, in my view, is one of the greater boxers within the UFC's history. Dustin Poirier might debatably be the greatest UFC fighter ever to never win the official belt in the division. Dustin Poirier was that great of an all-around fighter in my personal view, and as a striker, especially as a boxer, phenomenal.
It's very real. He said he was going to do it. He went out there. He did it. Everything I said that Max needs to do in order to win this fight, he tried. You saw him throwing kicks. You saw him keep his back off the fence.
And if you take a look at Ilia Topuria versus Max Holloway, no offense against Max Holloway, but the man really should be fighting at 155 pounds to begin with. Ilia Topuria looked like he was about 1.5 weight classes smaller than Max Holloway. I mean, it was absolutely ridiculous.
It wasn't enough. Ilia Topuria was a heat-seeking missile. Any direction Max went, Ilia was in his face throwing bombs. He's the truth, man. Take my hat off.
Well, shit, tell that to the commentating team. The way that the commentating team overall would have it, Max Holloway apparently was getting the edge in almost every single one of the boxing exchanges. Like, once again, this feeds into the delusion of a lot of the Max Holloway fan base. Like, if you ask the Max Holloway fan base, they'll legitimately tell you that they believe that Max Holloway, that he really won 2 out of the 3 fights against Alexander Volkanovski. Now, if you thought that Max Holloway won the second fight against Volkanovski, I can understand that because that was a fight that could have went either way. But the first one, in my personal view, wasn't even close. And the third one, I mean, we all know that one definitely wasn't close. But I've talked to Max Holloway fans before. They also believe that Max Holloway beat Dustin Poirier in that rematch. Like, these guys, man, like, their level of delusion is just on a whole nother level.
Yeah, for sure. And it's not as though he didn't deal with some adversity. I mean, he was taking shots. That was a very good Max Holloway tonight. That was not a matter of Max got caught or he didn't bring his fight skills. Or
Well, he was taking some shots. He was dealing with some adversity, but I think that the level of adversity was a little bit overrated. Like, some people, once again, they're trying to act like this fight was like it was like Conor McGregor versus Nate Diaz 1 or something like that. Like, that's not really what this fight was. It was a fight that was back and forth, but I don't think that, Ilia was, I mean, in the second round perhaps, but other than that, I mean, I've seen more competitive fights. The fight was relatively competitive, but to the point to where, I thought that Max Holloway was clearly getting the edge in some of the exchanges, or, clearly was getting the edge in the hand-to-hand striking. No.
any of these excuses, that was the Max Holloway that we've seen win world championships. He just ran into a guy that was a little bit quicker and a little bit better. One thing that Max has is a reach advantage.
Well, he ran into a guy that's all around more skilled than him. Ran into a guy that's all around more skilled, probably in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. That's why he was able to take him down on a couple of occasions. Ilia Topuria, for those of you that don't know, not only is he an elite level boxer and hand striker for an MMA fighter, but he also utilizes leg kicks to a great degree. And I believe also that he is an excellent jiu-jitsu artist. For those of you that don't remember, he was the first one to defeat Bryce Mitchell, who is known to be a ground expert, and I believe that he submitted him within the second round. So this dude, Ilia Topuria, man, like this this dude right here, this dude's a bad dude.
One thing Topuria does possibly better than anybody is to get inside.
Once again, take a look, how Topuria sets that up. When you take a look at his punches, he's always changing levels. And when you take a look at Max Holloway right there, he doesn't move his head whatsoever.
Reach out and to touch that target, to know where they're at. Topuria, if we could just show the follow-up of this is the big shot, but what Topuria does next is one of the biggest points of the fight, and he slips outside and dug to the body. Nobody does that. Everybody, they keep headhunting. You hurt a guy, you dig.
Yeah, Ilia Topuria actually was throwing some very, very good body shots. One of the punches that I could tell, which is also another boxing combination, is that they either feint or they throw a jab, up top to the body, and then they throw a right hook to the body, then they quickly get out of range. He landed that a couple of times, and I'm not quite sure how much it affected Max Holloway, but it's at least a punch that a lot of people, could utilize, whether it be boxing or MMA, in order to get some openings and to get a good body shot in.
The body, it paid off. That's what helped to lead to the ultimate knockout.
When we knew Chael, the fence was hot lava for Max. He had to get off of there, and he couldn't when Billy applied that pressure.
And I'm not quite sure about those stats. I would have to rewatch that fight, but I need to I need to know what significant strikes Max Holloway was landing that was quote-unquote more than Ilia Topuria. I mean, I could be wrong, but when I took a look at the leg kicks, it appeared to me that, Ilia Topuria was landing the majority of the significant strikes, and certainly the hand strikes, especially in the first round. The second round, I mean, it was kind of 50-50. Then I thought it was leaning towards Max, but then towards the final minute, I believe, I gave it to Ilia Topuria. I thought that, he ended up, kind of outstriking Max. But Max, he put up a very good fight. I don't think that, in my personal view, that he won either round. Maybe the second round, but definitely not the first.
Yeah,
knockout.
And Ilia was so calm. I mean, I got to go back to the way you approach a guy and the way you can stalk a guy. You can't get into the 5-round club. You cannot make it 25 minutes unless you have an ability to do that. And to see Topuria do this guy's brand new. This is his first.
Take a look at the accuracy numbers as well. When you just take a look at that once again, that's how you can tell. Max Holloway is the type of guy to where, even though he's a decent boxer and a decent hand striker, of course, for that of UFC, is he Ilia Topuria? No, he's not. When you take a little at Ilia Topuria, the man landed 52% of his significant strikes percentage, which is an amazing. Holloway still landed pretty good at 38%, but take a look at how many more attempts that he had to throw, So once again, he had to throw 60 more punches than that of Ilia Topuria. Max Holloway, a lot of the times, especially when he's facing fighters, that are not really quite on the same level, he pretty much outworks them not only off of his skill, but pretty much off of his sheer volume. But if you're able to counter that, especially off of an elite skill set like what Ilia Topuria has, then you can get him. Because once again, he does have flaws within his style. He does not change levels very well. He does not move his head very well when it comes down to it, and that is one of his main flaws.
stalk a guy. You can't get into the 5-round club. You cannot make it 25 minutes unless you have an ability to do that. And to see Topuria do this guy's brand new. This is his first title defense. He's fighting a fellow champion. People keep forgetting that. Max Holloway is a champion as we speak with the BMF. He did everything so right. Alex Pereira would be one that comes to mind that figured out how to do this in a very short period of time. Man, I got to give it to Topuria. This was very special what we just witnessed.
You know what he did well, too, is I think he used his height, his lack of height, to...
Topuria, in my personal view, when you talk about allegedly the #1 pound-for-pound fighter, when you talk about debatably who is the #1 pound-for-pound fighter, in my view, you're talking about Alex Pereira, you're talking about Islam Makhachev, and now you're also talking about Mr., Ilia Topuria. Now, of course, some people would say John Jones. I like John Jones, and I think that he's probably the greatest UFC fighter or MMA fighter that I've personally ever seen. But the man's only fought one time within the past 3 years. And at the end of the day, something does have to be stated about that. I mean, really, to be quite honest with you, if John Jones was not looked at as John Jones, there's no way that he would have been allowed to hold on to that heavyweight title. It's pretty much just absolutely ridiculous. But it is what it is, And, I would love to see the Tom Aspinall fight, but John Jones is really going to have to try to go after that fight because it's very obvious that he's a little bit shaken up by Tom Aspinall, or he believes that Tom Aspinall is at least going to be a very, very big threat. So we'll see where that fight goes. I do hope that that fight occurs. Of course, John Jones versus Stipe Miocic, that's the fight that ends up happening next. I do not personally believe that Miocic is going to win because the man, I believe, is about 42 years old. And the man, I don't think, has fought ever since 2022 or 2021. Whenever the hell the last time that he's fought, the man has been on like a 2-year layoff.
An advantage. He stayed small.
He fought short.
He fought short, and it made it very difficult for Max to find a hole to hit him in. He stayed small, and he stayed round. He was here the whole time. Every time Max would throw a punch, it would deflect off of his arm.
Yes, very great shoulder rolls, changing the levels, fighting small, which, of course, to his advantage. All great boxing abilities that Ilia Topuria has. That's how you can tell that he has a very rich boxing background. Now, would he possibly be a champion in actual boxing? Probably not. But when you talk about for an MMA fighter, the man is an exemplary level boxer. To be quite honest with you, he might be debatably the best boxer that I've ever seen for a UFC fighter.
Off of his forehead, he stayed small, and anytime he came up, it was a big punch first. It made it hard for Max to find that range to be able to hit him cleanly.
And Dean, you've acknowledged he's never out of position.
Never out of position. And that's the one thing, his reset time is probably better than anybody in all of MMA. He'll dip, and he's still in position. Most guys, they kind of move around.
Yeah, he'll dip, and he's also great position both with his feet and on top of that with his punching position. And on top of that, he gets out of range when he needs to. He's always changing levels. He's always getting back in position. And he sits down on his punches very, very well. That's once again how you can tell that he has a very rich boxing background. Ilia Topuria, man, that dude right there is, that dude's going to be a problem. Now, the one thing that I will say about Ilia Topuria is this, even though that boxing, in my view, does give him a great advantage, especially because he also has such a great ground game. But the thing is about Ilia Topuria that I will say is that he does appear sometimes to be a bit boxing stance heavy, which, of course, if you're just in a boxing fight, that doesn't mean they're going to be a problem. But if you're talking about either wrestlers or guys that really like to go after your legs, especially, if maybe you don't counter that as well. Now, it appears so far that he has. He seemed to do that relatively well against Max Holloway and also against that of Volkanovski. Two guys that do like to attack the legs. But, when it comes down to it, he is going to have to be careful because if you're a little bit too front foot heavy, then your leg can eventually be taken out.
I'll take a few steps to get back in position. He dips, he's always in position.
He is 16-0, 6 wins by knockout. He's got more submissions than knockouts, and we haven't even seen that at the championship level. He has submissions during his UFC run, which is now a perfect 8-0. Pound for pound conversation. Now Ilia Topuria finds himself among this list. One would think he's sitting behind.
He has to be above John Jones. Once again, in my view, and I love John Jones, but at the end of the day, it's like, dude, come on. Like, you got to fight more than once every 3 years. Like, it's just absolutely ridiculous. And I mean, of course, beating Stipe, that's somewhat great, but it's like, how great do we really even think Stipe really is at this point? I don't know really how good he actually is anymore because, once again, Stipe hasn't fought in like, what, 2.5 years? Possibly even a little bit longer than that. It's like, come on, John. Like, if he beats Tom Aspinall, then all right. But Stipe, it's probably a good win, but enough to regain that #1 pound-for-pound status? No, probably not in my view. So right now, when you're talking about the #1 pound-for-pound fighter, You're talking about Islam, you're talking about Ilia Topuria, and you're talking about Alex Pereira. It's one of those three.
Jones, Pineda, and Islam Makhachev. Dustin, should he rise above some of these trio of names ahead of him?
I mean, that's a tough list right there. But he deserves to be in there somewhere. What he's doing to these former world champions, time and time again, finishing these fights, knocking Max out. I mean, he's got to be up there.
Yeah, with a performance like that, you got to say, all right, he should be top 3. But then when you look at the list, you're like, who can you move out of the way? Like, you can't move any of those guys out of the way.
You can move John Jones out of the way because the man ain't fighting. It is what it is. Now, of course, he fights next month, I believe, in November, which is great. But once again, how great is Stipe Miocic at this point, really? Like, come on.
Put him in. So he is where he needs to be right now. Only time will tell whether he should move up or not.
And I will tell you, I mean, if we're just comparing resumes, I know he's not the BMF champion, but Lineage says that he is. I mean, Lineage, not for nothing, says that Topuria, undefeated featherweight champion, which I believe to be the toughest division. You could argue that with 155. And now he's got a BMF title, at least in Lineage.
Well, other than Alexander Volkanovski and also that of, Max Holloway and Ilia Topuria, I really don't find many of the other fighters there at 145 pounds really to be super duper A grade level fighters. Just in my personal view, I don't find guys like Arnold Allen or Lerone Murphy, whatever the hell his name is. I believe that those fighters are fighting at 145. I mean, Brian Ortega, I guess I'll give him A-, but do I find him quite to be on the same level as, say, quote unquote, a Dustin Poirier at his best, or a Justin Gaethje, or a Charles Oliveira? No, not in my personal view. 145 is a relatively good division, but in my view, it's a bit overrated. When you talk about at 155, in my view, that's where pretty much all the big boys were really for the past several years. When you talk about, pretty much ever since the Conor McGregor era, that division has been completely stacked. Whether you want to talk about Conor McGregor, Khabib Nurmagomedov, Max Holloway, Dustin Poirier, Justin Gaethje, Michael Chandler, Tony Ferguson, Charles Oliveira a little bit later on, Islam Makhachev, that division is, completely stacked. Now, it is weakening a little bit because some of those fighters are now starting to age, and I'm sure that some of them are retiring, but in my personal view, I'm not really quite sure at 145, other than Volkanovski and Ilia and Max, who else is really there, in my personal view, that you would really say is complete A grade. Maybe Brian Ortega at one time. Personally, in my view, yeah, Rodriguez, I've always thought he was a bit overrated. I thought that he was a little bit of a one-dimensional striker, in my personal view, or someone that has a little bit of an advertised striker, and that pretty much was proven because pretty much almost every single time that he's really fought against an elite guy, he pretty much got beat, but it is what it is. And a couple of other guys, but we'll see what happens.
For Mr. Hand Sanitizer, 2 years ago when Patty the Batty and him are throwing hand sanitizer, you guys remember? I had to go look him up. I think, man, this guy better not get in Patty the Batty's wheelhouse or Dana will bounce him because Patty's a hot commodity. All of a sudden, Topuria's in the conversation with Sugar Sean and Pierre for the biggest draw in the sport.
Yeah. Well,
where'd that come from? Mr. Hand Sanitizer?
If you guys leapt him over John Jones, then Dana would have a problem with
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that ain't happening. AI ain't even going to do that.
Definitely.
Yeah, clearly, John, for whatever reason, John Jones must have some special or secret pictures of Dana White. I don't know what the fuck's going on, overall with that, but Dana White is so far up John Jones's ass. And I get it. Listen, John Jones is an amazing fighter, all-time grade level fighter. Probably the greatest MMA or UFC fighter that I'm aware of. But at the end of the day, it's like, come on, dude. Like, at the end of the day, you got to give other fighters their credit, especially when they're fighting more consistently. I would even get it if John Jones was fighting once a year. But it's like, come on, man. The man hasn't fought ever since, what, Cyril Gane? I don't even remember when that fight happened.
Belongs among those top
for
champions
sure.
in the
That
UFC
was brilliant.
right now.
That
Based
AI
on
was
what he's
brilliant.
done.
The kids on the internet are skilled these days, man.
But anyways, that pretty much is about it for today. I just thought that I would talk about that. Just thought that was very particularly interesting. But congratulations to Mr. Ilia Topuria. I do believe that he is going to be the next great, all-time great fighter within that of the UFC, at least within that of the lighter weight classes. But we'll see how long that lasts, because of course he does possibly have a match against that, I believe, against Diego Lopez, one of the more tough contenders at the 155-pound weight class. In my personal view, Ilia Topuria is a better fighter than him, but he's also smaller. And when you talk about him versus Volkanovski, that's a fight that could potentially go either way. But in my view, Volkanovski has a little bit too much wear and tear on him, and I think that Ilia is going to have the mental hold. especially after these last 2 wins that he has. I would favor Ilia in both of those fights, probably to win by stoppage, but we'll see what happens. But should be very particularly interesting. We'll see what Ilia Topuria plans to do. He also stated that if he beats those guys, that he may very well move up to 155 and challenge that of Islam Makhachev, which I'm not really quite sure how great of an idea that is. But, I mean, Ilia Topuria, of course, a very dangerous guy indeed, so we'll see what happens. But anyways, that pretty much is about it for today. I just thought that I would talk about that. Thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see where this goes. Congratulations to Mr. Ilia Topuria and Khamzat Chimaev, and also that of Magomed Ankalaev, and all the other winners, of course, on the card as well. But it's going to be very interesting to see where this goes, because this card set up a lot of other future great fights in the future. Hopefully between that of Magomed Ankalaev versus Alex Pieta and Khamzat Chimaev versus Dricus du Plessis. And of course, Ilia Topuria maybe versus Alexander Volkanovski in a rematch. So we'll see. So Ilia Topuria versus Alexander Volkanovski too. But we'll see. But anyways, that pretty much is about it for today. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll talk to y'all later, and we'll see where this goes.